Hi everyone, my name is Dominic and I'm going to run you through the British Parliamentary, a quick how-to that covers, first on this video, a couple of topics. Number one, who is who, the different roles in the British Parliamentary debate format. Each individual speaker has an individual role, so I'm going to cover who is who in the debate. I'm also going to cover the length of speeches, that is how long each speech is, how it's structured, and what is it exactly is referred to or is expected of a particular speaker in terms of time obligations. I'm also going to cover the third one, which is role fulfillment. That's the one about how each and every individual speaker has a unique role. So let's get into it. In understanding who is who in the British parliamentary system, you need to think of it like you would any type of formal debate system. That is, there are two aisles, right? Or there are two main ideologies that are engaging in a particular debate. They're the yay-sayers, or the people who are saying yes to the motion. And then there are the naysayers. These are the people who are disagreeing with the motion or are saying no, right? However, with the British parliamentary system, it's a little bit unique in that on both sides of the aisle, or those who are saying yay or yes to the topic, and those who are saying nay or no to the topic, they're two teams, right? So that's how the format works. The format works in the sense that there are two teams on both sides of the aisle, right? Both aisles in more or less are seen as a hypothetical government, right? So in the British parliamentary debate format, instead of just merely saying yes or no, you're taking a position of a particular government. That is to say, if you were a government. So it's like a make-believe government, right? So we're going to enter into knowing who is who in these particular sides of the debate, right? So as I had mentioned, there are two sides to the yay-sayers, or the people who are saying yes. And because they're the government, or we're taking a position of a hypothetical government, they are referred to as the government of the day. So they're basically, the yay-sayers are referred to as the government, right? And on the government, the two sides are the opening government and the closing government, right? So in terms of the opening government, there are two speakers, right? Because each and every individual team has got two speakers. So there are two speakers, right? The first speaker from side proposition is referred to as the Prime Minister, while the second speaker is referred to as the Deputy Prime Minister. And then the second team on side proposition, the first speaker on that particular team is referred to as the Member of Government, and then the last speaker is referred to as the Government Whip. And then on this side, which is opposition, which is typically just referred to as the opposition, the first speaker is referred to as the Leader of Opposition, the second speaker is referred to as the Deputy Leader of Opposition, and then the second half of the opposition, the first speaker is referred to as the Member of Opposition, and the second speaker is referred to as the Opposition Whip. So this is a quick rundown about how the system works, how the format works, and the perspective in which you should be thinking yourself as you move into the British parliamentary debate format. We move on to the next one. Be made or broken based on how you manage your time and how you deploy your arguments in your time, right? So typically in times of rules of time, it's very simple, but it can tend to be a little bit complicated for new debaters, right? But you should think of it in this way: protected time, unprotected time, right? That is one of the key ways to think of time management in British parliamentary, right? So there are 7 minutes that each and every individual speaker gets in a British parliamentary debate, right? The first minute, that is from 0 to 60, is referred to as protected time. And the last minute as well, that is from 6 minutes to 7 minutes, is also referred to as protected time, right? So in that period in time, that is the time where a speaker is expected to be making either an introduction in the first section of their protected time or a conclusion. So in that particular, those particular minutes of time, it means that the opposing speaker, that is the speaker from the opposite team, whether it be either one of the speaker from either opposition teams, depending on which side of the aisle that you are, cannot give a point of information. That is, they cannot give an additional point or contradicting point or anything like that, right? So that's what you need to understand. In between, however, from the second minute until the 5th minute, right? Those minutes, those like 5 minutes are referred to as the unprotected time. In this particular period of time, you're at liberty to ask the particular speaker that is on stage a point of information. A point of information is simply asked by raising up on your feet. You can either stretch your arm towards the debater, or you can simply stand up in a way that is not disturbing, but in a way that, of course, makes the speaker understand that you want to get his attention and maybe you have got something to say. And it is to the discretion of that speaker on stage whether they give you that point of information or not. However, when they give you a point of information, you can only take 15 seconds, right, to ask your question or to give them a point of contradiction. Another big thing that we get, especially from new debaters, about what can points of information be, right? Points of information could be anything that you feel is important towards your case, or anything that you feel can take wind out of the other person's case. So it could be a rebuttal, it could be an argument, whatever strategic way that you want to use a point of information, you may use it in order for you to advance your case or discredit their case, right? So it's up to you, and the volition is yours on how you do that, but that's points of information. So as I mentioned earlier, we've got two teams from side government or side proposition, but in this particular section, I'm going to be dealing with the first team from that side, which is the opening government, right? So the opening government, as I had mentioned earlier, has got two named speakers. The first speaker is the Prime Minister, and the second speaker is the Deputy Prime Minister, right? So the Prime Minister has a number of roles, right? It's a very important role in the debate because it's a pace-setting role, right? It's also one of the most difficult positions to win in a debate. But if you would ask me, I would say that it's one of the easiest positions to win, because if you can truly cover all the bases in a debate, right, it's really possible for you to always win on side opening government, right? So I'm going to go through the rules of the Prime Minister with a brief explanation for each, right? So the first role is to introduce the motion. So this speaker is expected to give a layman understanding of what the motion is about, right? So they could do it in whatever stylistic way that they deem possible. They're also supposed to give background information for that particular topic, right? Most importantly, they're supposed to give a contextual understanding. At number 3, they're supposed to give a contextual understanding of that motion. Let's take it, for example, in a motion like this House will ban plastic bags, right? So someone who's already given a definition of that topic and has given background information of that topic. A contextual understanding means purely to just bring the debate to be more realistic, to bring the debate to the ground, right? So let's take it that you're on side government and you're in favor of the banning of plastic bags. A contextual understanding of the motion could go something like, what we're referring to as side government as a banning, we're not necessarily meaning that when people who litter, say with plastic bags, are going to be taken to jail or anything like that. We're just going to be giving small fines or significant fines to people whom litter. So you see, in that particular instance, you're giving us context of what exactly it is, how exactly it is that you understand that topic. Maybe you want to be moderate and not particularly extreme about your understanding of that topic. Next role is that you're supposed to give a government case, right? So a government case would be the thematic ideals that that particular government believes in. So in this particular instance of banning of plastic bags, you could say, as a government, we are people who are primarily looking to protect the environment, right? And protect the people of that environment. So that could be seen as a thematic understanding or as a thematic base point for which you're going to base most of your arguments on, or a number of your arguments. That is protecting maybe the environment and the individuals of the society as your stakeholder, right? Mature opening governments always are going to do some pre-engagement before the next speaker comes, right? So one of the biggest myths is that as a prime minister, because you cannot rebut, then you cannot engage, right? So one of some of the most prolific speakers in the game understand that pre-engagement is really important, right? So you want to say something like, we know that these speakers are going to come and speak about this, that, but this is how this already covers that, right? So it's really, really important, because you haven't heard any speaker speak before you, that you should do some pre-engagement. And lastly, argument. So let's go through the Prime Minister's roles again. Introduce the topic, give background information, give a contextual understanding of the topic, give a government case and a government case division, give a pre-engagement, right? And then move on to your argument. So that's how it's going to work. And then the deputy speaker, the deputy prime minister, I usually say has got two very important roles, right? The first role is rebuttal, right? This is something that is really, really underrated, because for immature speakers, sometimes they can not take into consideration the importance of rebuttals. So a debate and the value of a debate comes in the way you are able to engage your opposition or the people who are necessarily you're going against, right? And then secondly, you give new arguments and underline new arguments. If the Prime Minister has done their job and has given a case and a case division would be where he says, let's say I'm going to speak about the environmental aspect and how our policy caters to the environmental aspect and why it's important for us to protect the environment, while my second speaker is going to speak about, why it's important to protect the people also through our policy. What a new argument would be in that particular instance would be, say the Prime Minister did a good job at speaking about the environmental aspect. What you would simply do is speak about, protecting the people, so on and so forth. So that is primarily the role of a deputy speaker. All right, so for side opposition, we also have two teams like I had mentioned earlier. And in this particular instance, I'm going to be talking about the opening opposition, right? Which is the first side of side opposition to speak, right? And they've got two named speakers. They've got the leader of opposition and they've got the deputy leader of opposition, right? So we're gonna get straight into it. So a leader of opposition's role is basically to change the direction of the debate, right? Having heard the pace setter of the debate, which is the Prime Minister, what he's supposed to do is that he's supposed to recalibrate the perspective of the adjudicator to make them understand how they become relevant in the debate, right? So number one, what they can choose to do, this is an if, is to redefine the motion, right? So if they feel like the motion is a bit limiting, or if they feel like the motion is a bit unfair, for example, in what we're talking about, the ban of plastic bags, if someone misinterprets the motion, or the Prime Minister misinterprets the motion to say ban means, let's say, to burn, like to burn a paper, like to take a lighter and literally burn, right? That is something that you might want to redefine, right? That is in the extreme case. But if they say, still interpret the motion correctly, but they make it a little bit too limiting, right? And speak about maybe industrial plastic or a plastic that is so unique and rare that we don't know about it. and not consumer plastic bags, right? Maybe that's something that you might want to point out, that we don't think that that is like a really big issue because maybe industries already know how to dispose of industrial plastic bags as opposed to consumer plastic bags. That's something that you want to bring some redefinition of, right? They're also supposed to give, secondly, background information on that particular topic. They're also supposed to give rebuttals, right? So that's actually one of the first points of attack. So they're supposed to rebut and engage all the arguments that have been said by the Prime Minister. They're also supposed to give a contextual understanding. That is, how do they understand that topic? How do they bring that topic to the ground, right? And usually a good way of doing that is bringing some type of comparative analysis between what is being presented by the opening government and what you're presenting. So in the contextual understanding of the opening government, like I had said, they might say that we think that we're not talking about jail terms, we're just talking about like small fines that, put consequences towards littering. One thing that you might want to come out and say, that we don't think that fines are going to change the way people, feel and behave in terms of like littering. We think that, educating the public and running a campaign about how, we need to properly dispose of this particular plastic would be a better behavioral changer and a motivator towards behavioral change than, for example, a fine, which is really just retribution for that particular action. So you might understand the topic in a little bit of a different way and say, we would rather propose, and it would actually give credence to what it is that you're going to be proposing in the debate, right? And then, of course, they're going to give, the next role is that they're going to give the opposition case, which would be the ideals of what the opposition stands for. So we think that we need to rehabilitate the public in terms of changing their perspectives towards littering and making them understand how important it is for them to be a stakeholder in keeping the environment together. So that might be their case as a government, to change, and as an opposition, to change people's perspective in that sense. And then, of course, they give a case division. That is to say, I'm going to be speaking to you about the psychological aspects of changing people's behavior, while my second speaker is going to speak about blah, 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 blah. So that would be a case division for them. And then move on to their arguments, right? The second speaker, which is the deputy leader of opposition, they also more or less have almost the same role as the deputy leader of government, right? The only difference is that they are going to be rebutting two speakers as opposed to, one speaker with the deputy prime minister who would just rebut the leader of opposition, right? So really, their role is to give new arguments, right? That is, arguments that we have not heard in the debate before. So again, if the leader of opposition has done a good job at giving a case division and at handling their side, then it would be very easy for you to bring relevance to your role as a particular speaker, because the individual and unique role, I need to point this, of both deputy speakers is to bring in new matter. That is, to bring in new arguments, new issues that we have not heard before in the debate at that particular point. So before I move on to the closing government, which is the second half of the proposition, right, it's really, really important for me to get into some do's and don'ts about member speakers, whether it be the member of government or the member of opposition. It's really important for you to get this, right? Number one, a member of government is not supposed to contradict the opening teams, right? So in the instance of the government instance, when I spoke about the ban of plastic bags, and if the opening side was speaking about small fines that as a proposition of the ban, of saying small fines that maybe are supposed to change the behavior of how people do things, you are then not allowed for you as the closing side to come into the debate and say something like, we're going to give them huge fines because we think that huge fines are the way to solve the situation. That is a contradiction, a direct contradiction to what you're supposed to be doing in a debate. What you're actually supposed to be doing is you're supposed to be complimenting what they say. It's supposed to feel like a natural progression from the opening side, right? Secondly, you cannot collaborate with them. So I know that this is an online debate, but in a typical setting is that you would not be able to collaborate with them or to speak with them about anything with regarding to that particular topic. So whether during prep time or during the debate, you can't pass each other notes or anything like that, right? So having said that, and having understood that this is something that member speakers are not supposed to do it, rather the closing half of the government is not supposed to do. It's something that you should really take into cognizance, right? So the closing government boils down to two named speakers, right? We've got the first speaker, who is the member of government, and then the second speaker, who is the government whip, right? So the member of government has got what I would like to describe as well to be two roles, right? The first role is to rebut both the leader of opposition and the deputy leader of opposition. The second role is to give an extension of the government case, right? So I usually say, because a lot of questions are asked about what is an extension and how do you give an extension, right? So firstly, just as a lead up to the do's and don'ts of closing speakers, right? An extension is supposed to, when you listen to it, feel like a natural progression of the debate. So it's supposed to complement what has been said, right? But the quickest way to decipher how to come up with a good extension, and an extension that can actually win you the debate, is through simply finding the gaps in the debate, right? So in your opening side, in this topic of this household ban plastic bags, right? If the opening government focused on the environmental side and general protection of the environment, right? You might want to come in and say, these guys spoke about how we can protect the environment and protect people. But what they didn't speak about is the political will that would come with doing that, right? The political will that will come with protecting the environment, that you need legislators, you need maybe non-governmental organizations to sensitize the people in a different way, maybe in terms of what these laws would mean and why that the political will is important to harmonize those particular policies. So that's what you might choose as an extension, based on the gaps that maybe the opening teams did not cover. And then that could be your extension. So you could build your arguments and your ideas and your cases based on that particular rubric of evaluation for the debate, right? So that's the member of government. The government whip has got a couple of roles, right? Which, number one, is to rebut. Secondly, is to identify clashes. Thirdly, is to summarize the debate. And then fourthly, is to give distinguishing analysis. What do I mean by distinguishing analysis? In a British parliamentary debate, you need to understand, by the time you are a government whip, about close to 7 speakers have spoken before you. Actually, 6 speakers have spoken before you. So it's really important when you give your analysis for you to do it in the perspective of saying, this is how this team is different and this is how this team is unique. This is how the opposition is unique and how it's different. But this is what distinguishes us from the rest of them. So in your perspective and your analysis, you need to show us why, of all the unique ideas that have been presented in the debate, why your team maybe caters for a number of issues that maybe other teams didn't look at, and why it's the most important issue in the debate. Because after all, what this is all about is to distinguish yourselves. And finally, we get to the closing opposition in this particular debate. And I often like to say that the closing opposition holds a very unique position in the debate because they have the last say of the debate. It's actually a position that is very popular. A lot of debaters, when they're in the briefing room and they've been told you are in closing opposition, they simply just go, yes, because they know that this is an opportunity for you to listen to all arguments in the debate. And in the spirit of distinguishing yourself, from the rest of the debaters. This is one of the most strategically placed position for you to do that. It is a strategically placed position for you to distinguish yourself, because you've got the hindsight of having listened to the closing whip speech, the closing government whip speech, and heard his perspective about how he views the debate and how he views other teams, right? So in that saying, you need to be adaptive. So that's just number one. You need to be adaptive in your speech, right? You really need to be adaptive in the way that you see the debate, right? So number one, it is the member of opposition, right? So the member of opposition more or less has got the same type of role as the member of government, right? And what's that role? They're supposed to rebut in the debate, right? So they're supposed to rebut mainly the prime minister, deputy prime minister, and member of government. So they've got more to deal in terms of engaging those particular speakers, with a primary focus, however, on the member of government, because the member of government would have brought in new content that has not been engaged at that point in the debate, right? Maybe through points of information, but that hasn't been sufficiently engaged. So the rebuttals are supposed to primarily focus on that particular speaker, even though it is permissible for you to rebut either one. You're supposed to give an extension, and as is the rule with an extension, you just need to see the gap in the debate. What is the gap in the debate? How do you fill in that particular gap with your extension? What has not been said? Why is it that what you're saying is more important than what every other speaker is saying in the debate? And then finally, we have the opposition whip, right? So the opposition whip really falls into that alley that I said at the beginning of this, right? Which is the person who's got the benefit of hindsight, of looking at the entire debate. And number one, of course, giving the rebuttals, but with rebuttals in the perspective of having heard the whole debate. They identify the clashes of the debate, right? And say who won which clash, right? They also give a summary of the debate, and then of course that very important distinguishing analysis, right? That is to say, you give a distinguishing factor of why in particular, and this particular speaker is not allowed to give any new argument in the debate, because they essentially have to analyze the debate based on what has transpired from 7 speakers. So there would be the 8th and final speaker in the debate, and they would have to analyze the debate in that aspect. And if all the teams have done their job, this is a very heavy burden on a particular speaker, and it requires a really mature speaker to be able to analyze that debate. So thank you so much. This has been an introduction to British parliamentary system, going through the basics about how to go about the system. Thank you.